In Syria, fighting is continuing between Syrian security forces and armed groups in the southern city of Suwayda. It comes hours after a ceasefire was announced after negotiations with local community leaders. Meanwhile, Israel carried out airstrikes targeting Syrian forces entering Suwayda in what it says was a measure to prevent the troops from attacking the Druze community in the city. The latest fighting between Bedouin groups and Druze fighters has killed at least 70 people since the weekend. Syria says Israeli airstrikes violate international law. So the Druze are an Arab sect originating in 11th century Egypt with about 1 million members across Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Israel. The group's religion is separate from Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, but it's from the same family, including elements of Hinduism, Buddhism, and other philosophies and beliefs. More than 29,000 Druze live in the occupied Syrian Golan Heights. They identify as Syrian and have mostly rejected offers of Israeli citizenship since 1967, when the occupation began. In Israel itself, there are around 150,000 Druze Israelis. They hold citizenship and they serve in the Israeli military. Osama bin Javaid, you're joining us from Damascus, keeping an eye out on the situation in Suwayda. Tell us about the clashes going on right now and what's triggered the clashes in Suwayda as a whole this time around.
Well, this time around, in the last 24 hours, just yesterday, you saw the Interior Ministry and the Defense Ministry going in, securing Syria, and then coming out with a ceasefire plan. And that just immediately fell apart because there are some Druze fighting groups which did not want to be part of that plan, and they wanted to continue to try and protect those areas. And then there was what happened on the social media platforms across Syria, because there were soldiers who were posting videos of abuses. There were soldiers' bodies who were being desecrated, and that created a flurry of reaction and action from both sides. So now the situation on the ground is that the city center itself, there are sporadic clashes, but on the outskirts, there's a lot of fighting that has been happening between these Druze fighters and the forces from the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Defense. A large part of the city of Suwayda is where these forces have been pushed back, and as of now, there's intense fighting going on, including using heavy weaponry, and some witnesses say that drones are being used as well. And in top of that, you've got the belligerence of Israeli forces, where at least 7 strikes have taken place since the early hours of the morning. Multiple reports of injuries and soldiers who've been killed from the Syrian government side. It has been condemned by them, but it appears that Israel is maintaining what it calls its interests in southern Syria and continues to what it calls support for the Druze community. But again, the overarching view here is that it is an infringement of Syria's national integrity and sovereignty, and it needs to stop so these security forces can go in and overcome what they are calling outlaws.
Right, okay. I mean, you've touched a little bit upon this, but I'll ask you anyways. How is the Syrian government dealing with all of this, the Israeli violations of sovereignty on Syrian territory, as well as what's happening right now on the ground in Suwayda?
Well, apart from issuing statements, there isn't much that they can do about Israeli strikes, because Israel, since the fall of the Assad government, has taken out all of the military capabilities of the former Syrian military, including air defenses, air force, navy, and anything else that could pose a threat. And it continues to occupy more territory in southern and western parts of Syria, calling it a defensive posture to take territory which belongs to Syria. So on the part of the Syrian government, it can issue statements, it can condemn, but apart from that, there is nothing it can do. On the internal front, there is obviously there's a lot that needs to be taken into account because of the ongoing issues since the fall of the Assad regime, and beyond that as well, because there's been traditional rivalries between the Bedouin tribes and the Druze tribes. Since this government took charge, the Druze have not really accepted them as the government which will actually look after their aspirations and hopes as well. So those are being exacerbated by these armed factions and groups. What started off as abductions and counter-abductions on Friday has spiraled into something above and beyond, and these excesses that are being reported on social media are adding fuel to the fire. We believe that at least 70 people have now been killed, and that is a conservative estimate because according to local sources, and again, it is very difficult to verify because there's ongoing fighting inside the city of Suwayda, this death toll could be much higher.
Okay, Osama bin Javaid, we'll cross back to you as the story develops. Thank you for that reporting from Damascus in Syria. We'll now speak to Rob Geist Pinfold, who's a lecturer in international security at King's College London. He's also a research fellow at Peace Research Centre Prague, joining us from London this hour. Thanks for your time. Israel claims that it's acting to protect the Druze minority. It struck Syria several times already. What does its involvement signal to you about its intentions and what it's actually trying to achieve?
Well, it really is incredible when you look at the Israeli strikes and where we are now compared to where we were a week ago when we were talking about potential normalization of relations between Israel and Syria. Now we are in a very different ballpark where, as Osama mentioned there, Israel has launched a significant number of strikes on Syrian security force personnel. From what I'm hearing, the number of Syrian security force personnel killed is far higher than in any other Israeli strike since the Assad regime fell. So this was not purely performative. It seems here that Israel has been presented with a choice. It could either go down the path of working to cooperate with the Syrian government and working towards either a normalization or at least a stabilization of relations, or it could continue with the status quo, which is its pursuit of military hegemony and an extended occupation of Syrian territory. It has chosen the latter. What happened here is that Israel has been working closely with a Druze cleric, a renegade Druze cleric, rejected by much of the community, Ahmed al-Hijri, and it's his forces that escalated this fighting initially beyond basically what began as petty disturbances and kidnappings between Druze and Bedouin over a criminal act. It was his forces that then took government buildings and public service buildings within Suwayda, and it was then that Israel chose to act to defend him from Syrian security forces who are looking to restore order. So we have an extremely complicated dynamic here. What began as an act of petty crime has now degenerated into mass killings with a sectarian dimension, and of course the threat of further Israeli military action looming over everyone's head.
So just to be clear, Rob, I mean, could we be seeing the early signs of a more direct or prolonged Israeli military involvement in Syria? Is it really trying to destabilize Syria, create a new war perhaps?
Well, I don't think Israel's trying to create a new war with Syria. I think Israel is quite happy with Syria being weak and unstable. Remember that these clashes began because of a power vacuum. There is very little government authority within Suwayda. The security force presence was always very, very low because of a lack of trust, because those Druze militias refused to hand over their weapons. This was the new status quo. That broke down because a Druze merchant was mugged by, allegedly by a Bedouin gang on the highway outside of Suwayda, and that's what started all of this. So it began with a power vacuum, with the Syrian government being too weak. Part of that is because the Syrian government was more or less kowtowing to Israel's demand that southern Syria be demilitarized, not have a military presence, not have a state security forces presence. But this is a direct consequence of that policy. So it's a policy that Israel claims it needs to feel more secure, but actually it makes Syria more unstable, it makes it weak, it keeps it weak, and it moves towards the sectarianization of Syria, where Syria is a state in name only.
Does this put Israel, though, on a collision course with some countries in the West, like, for example, the United States, which claims that it wants a stable Syria, evidenced, of course, by the dismantling of recent sanctions, a move that will likely unlock investments in the country? So you have the West saying they want a stable Syria, and you have Israel, according to what you're saying, who wants to destabilize the country.
Well, that's right. It puts Israel on a collision course with the US. It puts Israel on a collision course with the Gulf states as well. Remember that Israel was lobbying the US to keep sanctions against Syria, that extensive sanctions regime that's existed for a very, very long time. The Gulf states were lobbying for the opposite, and in the end, the Gulf states won out, and the Trump administration announced that it would be ending its sanctions on Syria. But it threw the Israelis a bone. It promised them normalization, or at least steps towards normalization from the al-Shara regime, who did play ball on this. There was talk of a limited disengagement agreement at least coming into play here, or at least it being used as a bone to get Israel to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. We know now after that Trump meeting that Israel did not agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. It was frankly not particularly interested in normalization of relations with Syria or a diplomatic agreement with the new Syrian government. It prefers military hegemony. It prefers ruling by force. That's what we've seen since October the 7th, a much more active and aggressive Israeli presence throughout the region. And this is just one area where that is manifesting itself.
Okay, we'll leave it there. Rob Geist Pinfold, you're a lecturer in international security at King's College London, speaking to us from London this hour. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.